And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Mental health is the state of your psychological and emotional well-being. It is a necessary resource for living a healthy life and main factor in overall health. It does not mean the same thing as mental illness. On today's Open Connection, Natasha Chan.
I grew up here in Vancouver, BC with my mom, a household with all women actually. My mom, my grandma, and my sister, and I would say I had a fairly happy childhood.
What did you decide to do after you graduated from high school?
After I graduated from high school, I was actually not sure what I wanted to do, so I did take a few years off, and then I started to take a few courses. I wanted to go into, I've always wanted to help people. Ever since I was little, I said I wanted to be a psychiatrist or a therapist or some sort, but I took a few courses in human resources. That didn't really pan out, and so I ended up going to BCIT for film or broadcast. It was a really great program. I met a lot of friends and a lot of awesome people who I still talk to this day, and a lot of friends that I still am close with and meet up with. And it was a great time in my life. It was also a very kind of hard time in my life too, for some reason. I think that's when the mental health started taking its toll.
And I guess one of those things that we should let the viewer know is that today we're talking about mental health and mental health awareness because it's kind of a subject that people don't talk about. Did you experience that same stigma when you were at home? Did you talk about mental health?
I don't even think we knew what it was. I was talking to my mom just the other day about some of the things I did at home that were probably a cry for help, and she was saying that she didn't really know what was going on with me because she herself wasn't really aware of this topic of mental health.
I guess you could say almost cultural norms played a part of that, of not talking about mental health and mental health awareness.
My household actually, we're not very, we are sort of big on culture, but we're not the traditional Chinese household. And so I don't think culture played a big role in my household, but I think that it does in let's say some of my friends' household.
What did you do after BCIT?
After BCIT, I worked in a few reality TV shows around town as a production assistant, and then eventually went into assistant coordinating. And I had the opportunity to learn accounting. And once I learned accounting, I loved accounting for some reason, and eventually made it into the union side of film and became a member with the IATSE Film Union here in Vancouver.
Do you find working in the union kind of really help out when it comes to your career?
It was great because I was working great jobs. I was making really great money for the first time in my life. I felt like my career was going on a roll. It was an awesome feeling. But the thing was that film is a lifestyle, not really a job, as in you put in a lot of hours. It tends to really take up a lot of time because you work up to 14 hours, sometimes more a day. And so that ended up taking a big toll on my mental health as well. I think that's what brought me to where I am now. I loved the job so much, but in 2021, I burnt out pretty badly, and I couldn't really understand why. I had a lot of shame about why I burnt out. I didn't really know how to give myself rest. I didn't really learn any of those tools at that point. And so I was just really sad, which also didn't really help with my depression. But I had burnt out, and then I took some time off. I got back in, and then the next year later, I burnt out at around the same time again. And so it's really, as much as I love film, I absolutely love my job there. It's really making me think, is having a job that takes so much on your mental health worth it in the end?
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Job burnout is a special type of work-related stress, a state of physical or emotional exhaustion that also involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and a loss of personal identity. Let us return to the conversation with Natasha Chan.
So right before my second burnout was when I had my first very serious suicide attempt. I would say that when I was younger, I had maybe little ones, but the one that I had about a year ago was the one. And so that was the dark place in my life, and that was a very scary time for me.
And of course, when you get down to that, I guess you could say a bottom, there were still people around you that care and love you. Is that correct?
There absolutely was. I had lots of friends and family who were still there. A lot of my family live close by. A lot of my friends are friends that have been there since I was younger, like in elementary school. But when you are in that bottom, really, really bottom of the barrel, you don't see that or feel that, or most of all, you don't want that at that time. It's a weird mental place to describe, and I think people who have been there know what I mean. But I did have a lot of people around me, yes. I was still working at that time. About 3 months later, that's when my second burnout happened. My mind was just very manic. I was very easily agitated and just not in a good place to work. Not in a good mental space to work for me. And so I burnt out again. Now that I was burning out the second time, I felt even more shame. The fact that I wasn't going to work again, I thought I would plummet even more, worse than the first time. So I decided that this time I would call VGH Assessment Center to see if they would take me. So the Monday coming up, I made it, because it's also very scary to call them. It's scary to go to the hospital. I mean, I know it's always there. 911 is always there for you, but even though I struggled with it for so long, it's very scary to just go for some reason. That's my personal experience. I don't know if other people feel that way, but that is how I feel. I gave them a call and I talked to them for about an hour. And at that point, they did not find me critical. So they said if I were to go, they would definitely assess me, but they probably wouldn't take me in for a long duration or a few days. And I didn't find that to be very helpful to me, because I didn't just want to go and then get sent home. I already had a psychiatrist and a therapist. And so I then didn't go to the hospital, and I spent the next little time hitting it very hard with the therapy and with my psychiatrist.
I understand that you came across a author and you kind of had difficulties actually purchasing the book. Is that right?
Prior to my suicide attempt and always had an interest in books on depression and suicide, but I was always very scared of purchasing the books because of book shame. I had a lot of book shame. I was scared of what people think when I was holding the books, or scared of people judging me for checking out the books at the counter. And I would never purchase the book. But after I had my suicide attempt, 2 days later, I purchased the Suicidal Thoughts workbook.
And how did you come about picking that particular book?
I've done a lot of the workbooks before in my therapy, not that specific one, but other one geared towards like CBT or other types of therapy. And so when I was at Chapters, my just go-to place, because I couldn't be alone at home, because I was scared of what I would do. And so I would go out and I would just walk around, and Chapters bookstores is one of my favorite places to just go and, it was like therapy for me. So I would look, and then I saw the Suicidal Thoughts workbook, and I was just looking at all the severe depression, the things on suicide, and I didn't care what anyone thought because I was at such a low point at that time. And that one looked like the one I needed to work through everything, like a long duration. I didn't just need a book that I was going to read through. I needed a book that I was going to work on tools for.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Licensed clinical psychologist Dr. Catherine Gordon took what she learned from years of research, therapy, and other life experiences and channeled all of that into the creation of the Suicidal Thoughts workbook. Let us return to conversation with Natasha Chan.
When I had purchased the workbook a year ago, I had the intent to complete the workbook, and I didn't. And so coming up to a year now, anniversary of my suicide attempt, I was actually in a depressive episode around that anniversary date, and I was pulling out all my tools of what I could do to just relieve my mind at that time. And the other things I tried, one, A, B, C, D, nothing worked. I pulled out my Suicidal Thoughts workbook. It's always by my bedside. The intent was there. I just didn't do it for a year. And so I finally pulled it out and I started reading through it, and it helped me ease my mind. And I thought to myself, I need to complete this book. It's been a year. I need to complete it. And from that moment, I had a very strong desire to share my story. And the next day I filmed and shared and told people about my suicide attempt, and then shared that I was going to share my process through working through the Suicidal Thoughts workbook in case anyone needs to work through it as well. Because when I was going through a hard time, sometimes in bed, I would look on YouTube, I would look at Suicidal Thoughts, Suicidal workbook, and see if anything came up. Nothing came up. And I think if something like what I'm making had come up, I could have just listened through it. And so this is for someone who might be too scared to buy it, might not be there, might just need something to listen to. That this is for them. This is for also the me who needed it before.
So what has been the response since you decided to do this?
I've had a lot of good comments. I've received a few good comments in response. The topic of suicide is not for everybody. And that is something that I need to learn along the way, is that not everybody is ready to hear about mental health or suicide. But the people who are giving me wonderful feedback. A lot of them have had have lost people to suicide or know somebody who is going through it. And those people, they do reach out, they do message me, and they cheer me on. And that's the people that I'm doing this for. So it's worth it if just one person sends me a message.
And of course, I guess we should be clear that you're not just doing this on your own. You actually have help with counselors and psychologists. Is that right?
I do see my therapist once a week and my psychiatrist once a week. So I highly recommend, if someone is going through anything suicidal and having suicidal thoughts, first to get help. I know that's an easily said thing, but harder to do. But there's a lot of free resources out there. But yes, I'm sorry, I have so much to say on these topics that I just want to say everything. But yes, when I'm doing the workbook, I'm also checking in with my therapist to make sure that I'm on the right path. I'm not getting too involved with things outside of my body. That I'm focusing on sending the message, and that's the goal.
What are some of those things that you do, I guess you could say daily, that kind of help you with your mental health?
One key thing is I make sure I take my medication. I've been on medication for quite a long time, and when I was younger, I would not take the topic of taking my medication seriously. And now that I'm older, I set an alarm and I take my medication at the same time. And that helps me a lot. I also am practicing yoga, which helps me a lot. I also read, which helps a lot, and I go for walks. But these simple things have taken a long time to build up, for sure.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
If you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, please know that you're not alone and that you are worthy of help. Your life and well-being matter. When you're suffering, life challenges can feel overwhelming and even insurmountable. In this final segment of Open Connection, Natasha shares some of her coping strategies.
There is a big difference in the mindset of someone who's been to, for me, on a regular day, it's all bright and sunny. But if I'm in a dark place on a bright sunny day, I can't see the sun. I can't feel the sun on my skin because everything is so dark. And that's from the severe depression, that's from the manic, that's from not being able to cope with my emotions and regulate them. But I find, as someone who struggles with that I relate best to someone who understands. And so I very much applaud the author for creating this workbook.
What advice would you give some people who are kind of saying, I feel a little off? What would you suggest for them as advice?
Because at this day, there's so many things that can make us feel off. Sometimes stress is a big one in this day, and especially living in Vancouver. Sometimes it's your diet, sometimes it's your health. So I would suggest starting off, getting outside, getting some fresh air, stretching, going for a walk. If you feel like if those things don't work and you feel like you might have depression, talk to your family doctor. That's how I started. I didn't know what I was feeling when I went to I knew I was feeling something off, but I didn't know it was depression. And I went to my family doctor. He made me take a paper quiz and asked me a bunch of questions. And then once the quiz was done, he said, I think you have depression. He asked me if I wanted to go on antidepressants. I said no, because I didn't want to just jump right into antidepressants. I was also much younger at that time, but he then referred me to a psychiatrist. And here in Vancouver, the psychiatrist was covered and it's still covered. So I don't pay anything for my psychiatrist. But yes, I have actually had a lot of people message me saying they don't know where to go. They don't know where to start. And start wherever you are. Like just even write down, this is how I'm feeling. Go on YouTube. Look at anything, like Google the words that you're feeling and see where it leads you. Don't self-diagnose, because that is the worst thing. I've never self-diagnosed myself. I definitely talk to my therapist throughout my whole journey to keep myself on track, because for myself, my mind wanders and I need to just check in with somebody. And that is one thing too. Check in with a friend. I have an accountability friend who I just check in with, and she is one of my biggest cheerleaders, because when for instance, I'll ask her, I feel ashamed for taking a nap. And she said, no, you were tired. That's okay. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So check in with your friends, because more often than not, your friends care about you. They're there. And like the more we talk about it, the more we can end the stigma about mental health.
And is there anything I might have missed that you'd like to add?
Oftentimes I get lost about my past, but I think about who I'm doing this for. And I'm doing this for the me that made a suicide attempt. I'm doing this for the me who made a suicide attempt a year ago. But I'm also doing this for my niece, because I want her, my niece, I'm doing this for my niece, and I'm doing it for my friends' kids and for any of the kids out there, because if they should grow up and feel any type of mental health symptoms, I want them to be able to talk about it. I don't want them to grow up in a world where they can't talk. And I think if we start talking about it, that the kids of the future can have a better life.
I grew up on the reserve. I grew up in my home community. I am Natasha. When I was in high school, there was one particular tragic event that happened. My uncle, who I was very close to, he committed suicide, and that was very difficult for me. I started to feel like I needed help. I've been able to access ongoing counseling. I have this box. It's something I learned. It's like a compassion box, and so inside that box I have the crisis line support, that phone number in there, and I have some essential oils and different cards and affirmations and things like that. It's okay to seek out help where we need to, and that seeking out help doesn't make us weak. That is a way of being strong.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.